Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our very first fall author and their journey series featuring our local Pasadena resident, Chip Jacobs. Chip grew up in Pasadena, and we are just delighted to be able to welcome him today to our authors and their journey series. So before we actually get started, I want to remind you to please mute yourself. Today's program is going to be recorded on YouTube. Thanks to Chip to allowing us to do that. And you can view it starting sometime tomorrow or the next day and share it with all of your friends. So thank you for doing that. Also, your live transcript, you have to enable that yourself on your computer if you would like to view that. So before we get going, I want to tell you also about how chat's going to work. So if you put your questions into chat at the end of the program, Chip has assured us that he will answer all of your questions, everyone's questions and all of them. And also we're going to be having a very, very special trivia contest at the end of this that Chip is running. So you have to be sure and listen to all of his little tidbits so that you possibly can win the trivia contest. So as I said, Chip is a product of Pasadena schools. He talked with us about the fact that he grew up near the Hastings Branch Library and went to the Hastings Branch Library growing up. Now he uses the Linda Vista Branch Library. Of course, going to the Hastings Branch, he grew up in northeast Pasadena. In 1985, he graduated from the University of Southern California with a BS in journalism and international relations. In 1988, he earned his MA in international relations, emphasizing national security affairs from the American University in Washington, D.C. He broke into journalism in 1990 at the Los Angeles Business Journal. His passions include Trojan football. How did you guess that? As a graduate of USC, and he attended the game in the heat last Saturday. He loves Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Squeeze Maniac, electric guitar, forgotten literature, running, and super sugary breakfast cereals. He lives in Southern California and uses this Linda Vista Library a lot. He has two daughters that are graduates from, I'm not sure, both of them from SC. One of them's from SC. Yeah. And they're out in the world working, and we're just thrilled to be able to welcome Pasadenan Chip Jacobs. So welcome, Chip.
Well, thank you for that great introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I know it's 5 o'clock and people are just getting back from work, taking a break. So yeah, I've been lucky this is my second event with the Pasadena Public Library. It seems like years ago, was not that long ago, I did an live event for my debut novel, which was a historical one about the construction of the Colorado Strait Bridge. This book today is about as different as humanly possible. I got my start in journalism, and it was a fantastic platform for me because I'm just endlessly curious. I sometimes get bored. I can as a reporter, you got to jump around in different subjects, whether it was politics, transportation, crime, features, that type of thing. And so this story I'm writing now, actually, I began to think about when I was at the Los Angeles Daily News in the late 90s as an investigative reporter. And I got to know a guy named Jerry Snyderman. He was a source and just fed me tips that led to one expose after another. When I decided to focus on writing books, I maintained my friendship with him. I was still freelancing. And one curious day really did change my life, and I think it changed his. We were walking down Hollywood Boulevard, which is a very odd place when it's packed. And Jerry stopped me actually on the sidewalk and said, "Did I ever tell you that I had a double murderer chasing me, that I had a partner killed?" was almost verbatim. And I kind of rolled my eyes in that cynical reporter's way. It's like, yeah, sure, you're just telling me a big fish story. But sure enough, he was telling the truth. And indeed, he only knew a sort of keyhole wide view of what happened. And I just got more interested in this. It wasn't my typical cup of tea. I did not consider myself a crime writer. I still don't consider myself a crime writer. But there was something so human about what he got embroiled in. So I'll just tell you the basics. So the book is called The Darkest Clair, a true story of murder, blackmail, and real estate greed in 1970s Los Angeles. The story really can be broken down into four definable segments. It kicks off as a thriving space planning business in 1979, operating out of a very cool mansion on the edge of the Miracle Mile district in mid-city Los Angeles as it unravels, somewhat mysteriously. It then follows the aftermath of any business breakup, which usually means backbiting, bitterness, lawyers squabbling about who did what, who owes whom. Then it tightens into a psychological thriller that can be very intense at times and also comical, darkly so. Really, when the villain in our story, think of sort of a man who's a crocodile, he starts to tighten his claws around the throat of a naive 20-something prodigy who'd only believed that monsters were in movies. He didn't realize they could wear clothes and drive a car. And it culminates as this Jerry, my original source who's telling me the story about 20 years after it happened, he has to do the most brave thing he's ever done, which is face down this evil person who was hiding a lot of secrets when he joined the company. He has to do that or brace for his own extinction and maybe his family. And one of the trippy elements of the story over the years that I've been learning about it in drips and drabs is that people don't believe that it really happened. But as I can assure you, it did. And truth is really stranger than fiction. The heart of the story is three men. It's Jerry, who, as I mentioned, was this really brilliant space planner, but a very geeky, somewhat invisible guy who was cutting deals with building owners throughout Los Angeles that were almost all older than him, and sometimes actually tried to intimidate him. His partner was this man 12 years older named Richard Kasparov, and I changed his last name to protect his family. And Richard was charming. He had beautiful hair. He looked a little bit like Richard Brolin. And he was also somebody sitting on secrets as the villain was. But Richard's problem was he he was afflicted with bipolar. They used to call it something else back in the day, and a habitual inability to be honest. And he had cheated a lot of people through his life, and he assumed he would always be able to. And then he came across a third man who was part of this space planning partnership, and that guy's name was Howard Garrett. And Howard Garrett was older than Richard and a lot older than Jerry. And he was this quiet, kind of Charles Bronson-y looking redneck who had experience working in every major skyscraper in Los Angeles, was very observant, came off as sort of a patriotic, strong, silent type. The type of guy who'd have a flag out in his flag flying at 4th of July, would pay a neighborhood kid to cut his lawn. But in fact, he actually was a killer who had successfully gotten away with a bunch of homicides. All Jerry and Richard saw, who were ambitious, was Howard was going to help them broaden from space planning or basically interior architecture into doing suite construction and luxury home remodel. So this again is the late 70s. Proposition 13 is just passed, the ultimate symbol of populism. And he these three men knew homeowners and others had lots of money in their pocket from the money they were no longer paying to property taxes. So that's sort of the basics of the story. It was a murder triangle with three people. We don't know who survives, but without giving you away too much, the person that you least expect to come out of this vanquishes the other two, and it changes them forever. So that's kind of the elements of it. Far better for us to show the video trailer of the book, which will give you a sense of the tone of things, and will show you some of the pictures of the principals. And you will see that this has got a very kind of Coen Brothers feel. So if we could run that video, that'd be great. I think we're trying to run the video. Hello?
Yes, we're trying to
Okay.
run the video. We're coming on. So while we're waiting to run
Sure.
the video,
1 second.
I want to remind everybody that you can get a copy of Chip's book, To the Darkest Glare, at the Pasadena Public Library to check out. And you can also purchase it at Vroman's Bookstore.
That's
So
great.
now here's the video.
Well, thank you very much for running that. So, that will give you a taste of the action involved. And somewhat humorously and also encouragingly for me, having worked on this story for so many years, when I posted this on Facebook, I had so many people asking me where they can tune into the Netflix show for, like it was actually going. I'm trying to make something like that happen, but that's TBD. I'm not a big believer in long readings by authors when all these nice people are online listening, because I think reading is just a very interior, private, exciting experience, and not to be read out loud. Nonetheless, I'm going to just give you a taste of the beginning of my book. So this is called Chapter 1, A Deck for All Seasons. It's just a few minutes. They huddled at the base of the stairs, panting steam, packing bad intentions. Above their heads, a patch of soft light glowed through the sliding glass window outside the master bedroom of their two-story home where two people lay in bed, people oblivious to approaching invaders while rain from another heavy storm pounded down, people who assumed they had all the time in the world to get high and then naked. The ringleader, here to supervise the task that his minions had bundled with almost comical frequency, whispered how the midnight operation was to unfold. Their movements needed to be cat quick and meticulous, not so much as a cuticle left behind. The soggy evening, with the neighborhood toasty under mid-century roofs, was an advantage they dare not squander. Everything rode on the bullet scheduled to fly from the barrel of a vintage rifle originally mass-produced to kill Nazis. So much hinged on a single projectile needed to free up the spoils in the kickoff of a lucrative and ludicrous enterprise that Los Angeles never seen before. If the designated shooter misfired and his chief's brackish vengeance went unexpunged, beware. The next bullet might have his name emblazoned on it. Whoever said the San Fernando Valley was dishwater dull. The trio crept up the flight, past the potted fern, toward the deck overlooking a backyard pool, sloshing chlorine whitecaps in the deluge. They arranged themselves in a position next, just as they rehearsed, squatting in the opposite edges of the window to evaluate the scene inside the fishbowl-lit room. Ah, what a glorious sight it was. The fellow they'd been hunting for months was mere feet away, reclined sideways on his queen-size bed, listening to a cute woman in a male pajamas top reading. The assassins, who driven in from points east, were different breeds united by a common purpose. The trigger man was a diminutive, helmet-held character, salivating to use the big gun he'd acquired in a crafty haggle. His wingman was a thin, lyrically named crook without his cohort's felony notches. Both were atop heroin dragons when tonight's launch button was pressed, but they made emergency landings to attempt sobering up in a snap. Coffee, a frigid shower. The last thing they intended to do was quibble over timing with a person whose buzzardy face was the final visage a handful of unfortunate sorts ever saw. Anyone fuzzy about what Pat was capable of doing should interview their ex-associate, the one who developed misgivings after accepting the contract and fled town. Welching on his promise had visited terror on his family and nearly resulted in his own skull being rearranged with a .357 Magnum on a San Francisco sidewalk. Someone else who had infuriated Pat was unable to vocalize any warnings. He'd gone from sipping cocktails on a fall afternoon to being set ablaze in the scrubland outside LA. Pat's management philosophy about his underlings completing their assignments was absolute. He'd tolerate no job suggestion boxes, only compliance. Now he crouched over his marksman's shoulder, eyes glazed, mouth ajar, waiting for the muzzle flash that he'd been fantasizing to rubberneck. Ding! What better time for another in a series of what now hiccups to frustrate them again, like klutzes in some clown show. He'd been seconds from flashing the signal. The new message, how fickle opportunity can be. The target, a college boy real estate entrepreneur who once employed him in a manipulative partnership, must have heeded the beep of a Darwinian radar, must have attuned to the radar blinking that he and the woman might not be as alone as they figured. The rustling of feet, a squeaky plank, heebie-jeebies, that foreign eyes were watching them. Whatever his sixth sense detective was worth investigating. The man they come to obliterated lifted his drowsy head off his snuggly comforter, twisting in opposite direction of the blonde with him. Next, he did something nobody here had anticipated in their elaborate preparations. He stared directly at them, behind the window representing the single barrier between him and a supposed last gasp of air. Hey, was someone out there? From his recesses, Pat cringed and cursed, fit to be tied, questioning if he should have toted along a lucky rabbit's foot. How gruesome things would get for prey and predators alike, he knew, if that window's glare didn't thwart his quarry from seeing the truth, from reading what lurked beneath those dripping eaves. So that's just a little taste of the beginning of the book. You saw many of the principles. I'm going to leave it to reader's suspense to know who was first up in the crosshairs. But I did want to just talk before I did a little PowerPoint just to set the era, just to talk about the broader themes in the book. The first one really is something that we've seen transpire over the years, over the millennia with people trying to make money. And that's the point at which normal ambition, collective ambition, metastasizes into something dangerous, into greed that makes people lose their inhibitions and sacrifice their morals. That's exactly what happened here. Two of the main partners in this space planning company called Space Matters forgot that not everybody is like them. And some people operate with very feral intent when their self-interest is jeopardized. They had no idea that the man they were hiring to run construction was kind of surveying them the way a crocodile or other reptile would look at some innocent animal on the edge of a swamp. So it is a lesson about avarice, and that if you reach too far to make money maybe you don't deserve, you may not be bringing back an arm with 5 fingers on it. There may be some things missing. The other element that I really liked about this story, and I think does set it apart, is understanding big cities especially are really a whole host of smaller cities sharing the same zip code or perimeter or sports teams, but they're very different. On different sides of the same freeway can be completely different existences, where some people get to shop at shiny indoor malls and other people have to scrape nickels together to go to the dollar store around Christmas. In our story, it's a collision of 3 sections of Southern California. We have the anti-hero, Jerry, who grew up in a very odd childhood in North Hollywood, which is a million miles from the real Hollywood we think of in our cultural dreams. His partner, Richard, this handsome, smooth-talking, deal-closing salesman, he came from the Platinum Triangle of Los Angeles out in West LA, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Brentwood. That was his natural terrain. And he had some elements of entitlement, being pampered, and creative as he was, I don't know if he ever fully stood on his own 2 feet. And that's really the sadness of the story. Howard Garrett is our contractor, the man with all these dark secrets. Even though he was living in Arcadia and later Pasadena, he really wasn't a natural native here. He associated with people out on the eastward of the county, especially Ontario, which back in the late 70s was a very down on its luck bedroom community, a little bit Rust Belt, full of people that looked west to glamorous LA, especially Hollywood, and wondered where is their piece of the American dream. So it's really an interesting collision of 3 sections of LA, almost like a body of water fed by 3 different oceans. And the turbidity is different, the salinity is different. Bringing together 3 distinct elements changes an organism, and that's what happened here. I like to also talk about the parallels of today and 1979. When you look at 1979, America was a pretty angry place, as it seems today. There was sort of a broiling layer of populism that we saw obviously on January 6th, but we also saw in 1979 when I was a kid, and you saw it in Proposition 13. You saw it in politicians being hung in effigy. You saw it in fights in gas lines. You saw it in quote unquote white flight out of urban areas where people were putting their kids in private schools, slapdashing alarm systems in. It was a dangerous time, I must say, 1979. The crime was much higher than today. I mean, it was so ridiculous, the number of serial killers out there. I mean, they almost could have been high-fiving each other on the freeways. I mean, we had the Hillside Strangler, the Freeway Killer, the Dating Game Killer, the Golden State Rapist, who later we found out's a murderer. I mean, it was a sinister time. I had my own brush with an angry person in a road rage incident out in Altadena. So even though LA and the perception of it might have been carefree and palm trees and laid back and opportunity galore, there was tension in the air in 1979. And it only got worse with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the taking over of the US Embassy in Tehran, compound that with stagflation. I mean, it made for a time when the movie Network, which is this classic movie about the zeitgeist of America in the 70s, it felt almost like a documentary. At one point in this movie, if any of you remember it, the newscaster, who was named Howard Beale, it was a real time to be named Howard, he encourages people to go throw open their windows and scream, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore." And in fact, many people weren't taking it anymore. So, those are some of the broader themes. And, if we don't learn from the past, and we don't realize that every generation Americans seem to get frustrated and disenchanted with the system, we're just going to guarantee more of them. If we could show the PowerPoint, I just want to bring you into the era we're talking about, and it'll be a little fun walk down memory lane. Okay, so the first slide we're seeing is in 1979, we got to see a revolution in sports called ESPN, created by a French company. And, it seemed like a new day in television and communications, 24-hour sports. Next slide, please. This was, I believe, the Voyager spacecraft produced by JPL that was sent out in the cosmos. And as all of you know, or many of you know, Pasadena has a really illustrious history when it comes to exploring the cosmos. And we sent this out about 10 years, I believe, after we reached the moon. So it was still, we still saw America and the world aspiring to learn about our place in the universe. So that was pretty cool. Next slide, please. This is one of the great cultural innovations of 1979. And I can tell you, people were bananas about the Sony Walkman. And the Sony Walkman was like the father of today's iPod Touch. Think about that. Next slide, please. So the day after the murder at the heart of this book, 3 Mile Island happened. And in a case of life imitating art, this disaster were part of the reactor melted down, came on the heels of a really terrific movie called The China Syndrome, starring Jane Fonda, Michael Douglas, which was dramatizing just this possibility. So it was a very odd synchronicity between what you saw in a movie theater and what was happening in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. There's Jimmy Carter in his famous, I call it his Mr. Rogers sweater. And for some of us at a certain age, he would come on TV and ask us to turn down our thermostats, not consume so much gasoline, do things for the common good. He was grappling with a lot of multiple crises. And I don't know if being president was what he bargained for. So there's Jimmy Carter. Next slide, please. This is, of course, Tehran, Iran, taking over the US Embassy. And if you look carefully, you can actually see some Western influence with a sign written in English to the far left. Then they're hoisting up an American flag upside down, chanting sometimes "Death to America." You see a poster of Ayatollah Khomeini. And, beginning of our turmoil with Iran that still lasts this day. So think about it. It's going on 45 years or 42 years. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was one of my favorite albums of 1979. And in fact, I wrote a whole essay about how that music from 1979 perfectly captured the dark atmosphere of the world and America in particular. Some of my favorite songs from that time were Pink Floyd's The Wall, the album, and the songs on there. Elvis Costello's famous song, Accidents Will Happen. You had songs like I'm the Man by Joe Jackson. You had songs by a group I love called Squeeze, one called Cool Cats, about being a young rock star. There was songs about escaping from evil called Highway to Hell. Some people just call that the 405 freeway. But my favorite song from that time, which really explains Jerry, this smart, sheltered kid trying to understand the crazy, scary things happening to him in otherwise normal life. It was Supertramp's The Logical Song. Next song, please. So I love The Logical Song. Sometimes there's a disconnect between art and reality. In 1979, I think it was really a very accurate depiction of the mood of the country. This was Deer Hunter, which if you have not seen, I really recommend. Deer Hunter is just, it transports you back. And I think you'll see in some of the action there, contemporary themes. Next slide, please. Of course, this was everybody's favorite show, Dallas. I mean, we all loved to hate J.R. Ewing. And, he came from a different Texas, but still kind of a similar Texas. I love Dallas. It was a Western soap opera. And I'm unhappy with some of the parts of that story and how they brought Bobby back to life, but that's another conversation. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the Century City Towers out at the old ABC Entertainment Center, and this is in West Los Angeles. And these are beautiful, daring buildings that really slash the sky over the West LA skyscape, and they look very aggressive to me, almost like the architectural version of a Death Star. Jerry Steiderman worked in these buildings, and these were considered the vanguard of the new LA. And they were expecting a lot more development out there. But Jerry made a lot of his first impressions, especially with this strange guy named Paul Fegan, who created something like WeWork today, but with legal suites. So these buildings were both terrifying and promising. And when Jerry was on the run for a couple months, holed up in a hotel, I'm sure he wished he was back there doing deals and using his imagination. So next slide, please. Okay, this is like when I was in high school, I had a girlfriend that went to Marlboro. This is the Sunset Strip. It's we're right looking at this famous bend. And if you just kind of look at the cars back then, you can see Volkswagens, you can see Chryslers, you can see Cadillacs, you can even see Volvos. You'll also notice who were the hot names culturally back then. You've got Judy Collins, probably a new book out. You've got Cher, and you've got Eddie Money, looking very cool over there to the left. So, I mean, pictures like this, photos like this convey more than an author ever can. So this was the LA Jerry was living in when things went into the toilet. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is a picture of Jerry. I'm sorry about the lack of clarity. Some of these pictures are 40 years old. But you can see he actually was kind of a nerdy, good-looking guy with curly, frizzy hair, little bit squinting eyes, but to me, a very naive expression. There's one picture I found of him that I'm not using, where he's going to a Renaissance fair, if that brings back memories, and he's in bell bottoms. That just tells you the disco era very well. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I've probably told you already in a spoiler alert fashion, Howard is our villain in the story, and I really worked to humanize him and show you, he didn't wake up as a 3 or 4 year old boy thinking, I want to do bad things to people. His life went very, very off track. And by the time he decided, I'm no longer going to try to be a blue collar, I'm going to seek revenge on people I don't like, it was a full transformation. At one point, he holds hostage a family in Monrovia that he once befriended when they moved from Argentina to Arcadia. And in fact, he was so kind and giving, he dressed up as Santa Claus for them. And only years later, he sent his henchmen to rob, kill, and plunder them for money that actually didn't exist. So, I mean, it's, can you imagine going from Santa Claus to mastermind of a bloody scheme? Things really had gone wrong in Howard's brain. And one wonders if he wasn't mentally ill. Next slide, please. So this is one of the more interesting people. They're all interesting to me, but this is one of the people that worked for Howard when he created a boutique murder for hire operation targeting real estate executives. Johnny, depending on who you believe, was either semi-brain damaged or a criminal savant. And he had already killed numerous people when he joined Howard's company, but nobody ever really investigated these murders very well. He was never arrested. And I think he believed he could get away with anything like Howard. The difference was that Johnny, when he was a child, had like a genius IQ, reportedly a photographic memory, but something awful happened to him where he conked his head. And if you've heard about people whose personalities have changed, when they've had a head injury, Johnny was one of them. And he became the DA's star witness, and he put on a presentation that blew the jury's minds because he told them about an LA, the underbelly of an LA most of us didn't want to believe existed. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a picture of Howard. If you look at him, he is dressed in a Hawaiian shirt. This is his mugshot. You can just see a sense of disbelief and outrage in his eyes, I think. His eyes are very far set apart. And I kept asking myself, what animal does he represent? And I just kept coming back to crocodile or alligator. And, alligators famously can shed tears. I mean, as a human metaphor, where he's just faking compassion or sadness. And Howard did just that after he committed his first murder. And so Howard, as I mentioned, originally lived in Arcadia. He had been what he thought was manipulated by previous white-collar bosses and had to downsize and move from a place across from the Arcadia Mall into a condo, very bland-looking condo on Del Mar Avenue, not far from the Rose Parade route. Not far from where I used to go hang out all the time. And it was out of this house where he planned his murder for hire and where he was arrested in a very entertaining style. And I'm sure Howard had plans to move into a bigger house after he made his money by killing and extorting people. He even thought about moving to Mexico, but his signature outfit was kind of work boots, blue jeans, and a Hawaiian shirt. He's 49 years old, but boy, this guy sure looks a lot older, if you ask me. Next slide. So you saw the earlier picture of Jerry. He was on the run from Howard and these other people that thought they were going to be making easy money taking down soft, college-educated architects. He changed his whole personality, and he definitely changed his whole appearance. And Jerry used to wear very finely tailored suits, European suits, to make himself look older because he was a 27-year-old kid running a company making more than his father ever did, but he was dealing with older people who expected to see an executive from an interior architecture company with gray hair or lines on his face. So he could go out in public. He could go visit his family who he'd stashed away in the Midwest. Jerry had to take on a whole nother appearance. And as you can see, he's wearing a Caterpillar construction beanie, big sunglasses. That's actually a Caterpillar construction jacket, just with some different type of patches on it. And he looks like a guy, as I say in my book, that either just walked off a construction site or was rejected by the village people that they needed a new member. And, it is, I'm sure when the immediate danger was over, Jerry still felt like he needed to wear a disguise. And, he, like other people involved in this case, suffered PTSD. The difference was many of them got therapy and relief, and Jerry did not get that type of professional assistant. And as a result, what happened to him for those couple months in 1979 haunted him into an early grave. I met him when he was an activist about 20 years later, and he was pulling off some of the most audacious, muckraking activism and stunts you'd ever imagine somebody in Los Angeles doing. And people would even ask me, why is Jerry, he's risking his life, he's poking the bear of some very dangerous people. Why is he doing that? And little did I know before I understood Jerry's backstory that he was taking out his rage on bullies, just like he'd been bullied in 1979 and earlier. And we just didn't understand this was like Jerry 3.0. So next slide, please. Here's a little bit of the LAPD info that is talking about what happened. And as you'll see, this murder was handled by the Van Nuys division of the LAPD. If you look at this information about Howard, he had a mustache, he had a panther tattoo on his left arm, he had a skull tattoo on his right arm, he was a contractor. You'll see down at the bottom the name of the deceased. I blacked out Richard's real last name, but sadly enough, you just see the word deceased. And when somebody gets murdered, it's not only that person whose life in this world has ended, but it is irrevocably changed the lives of all those people that loved him, depended on them. And so I really tried to write this book not as a pulpy supermarket true crime book, but I tried to write it almost like as a novel where we try to get behind and understand the psychology of the players, where they were coming from, and what happened to them. A lot of true crime books, we don't really know what happened to people after it's over. Things don't just wrap up in a nice bow when the trial concludes. And in Jerry's case and his former wife's case, they were looking over their shoulders for years and years and years. Plate glass windows figured very prominently in my story, and people were afraid of those for decades. So that's really what I want to talk about. If we want to do a little Q&A, I think it would be great. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. Christine, we can't hear you. Christine, you need to unmute.
All of a sudden with the computer.
Yeah. Great. So if you want to just ask me questions, Christine, go for it. If there's anybody from the audience.
I know. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, great, perfect. I seem to be having some problems with my computer right now. So thank you so much, Chip, for that very, very detailed presentation about your book. Remember, everyone, I'm sure you want to read it and really enjoy it, and you can check it out at the library, and you can also get your own copy at Vroman's. But you have 2 bachelor degrees, one in journalism and one in international relations.
Yes.
So you do lots and lots of research. Would you say that really your journalism one is trained you to do your research, and your international relations opened you up to the possibility of what people might or might not do, or the history of the eras?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I like international relations because really in the end, it's about politics and relationships. But I would not, unlike other books I've written, well, somewhat like them, but this book required me to put on my old reporter's hat. And, you start with one person, you interview them, you ask them if they have any documents, pictures, and then you network. Who do you know? And it becomes exponential in the number of people and places that you go. And one of my Achilles heels is being impatient. But this book really taught me the virtue of it, because years would go by where I wouldn't learn anything. People afraid to talk to me initially would later call me and said, you know what, I've had a change of mind and I will cooperate. It taught me about being tenacious, just like I would try to be as a journalist, not give up. If I couldn't find something there, maybe it existed elsewhere. And my big break in this story, after I'd written the basic idea, is when the prosecutor involved invited me over to his house. He was retiring. All this is public records. And he goes, if you want to look through the box about this case, please do. And I just came back with armfuls of documents illuminating me about so much else, because, you know, it wasn't just 2 or 3 people involved in this story. It was 25. And where did they go? And what did they say under oath? And one of the, this is not a book that makes the legal profession look good, because as you'll see, 2 very famous lawyers knew about a murder contract days before that murder contract was executed. And they didn't believe there was any statutory obligation to intervene, because it could have been a crazy story. The attorney asking them what to do would have violated attorney-client privilege. And I could only imagine what those 2 lawyers, who you'll have to read the book to see, but I'll give you a hint. One of them was on OJ's Dream Team. What they felt, or how they reacted when they learned, oh my gosh, this person got killed. And I knew about it in advance, you know? And anyway, so to get back to your question, absolutely journalism was essential, but also was just reading a lot of other books, you know, and of course, you know, In Cold Blood remains the gold standard to me of true crime books. And that book was written in a very new journalism way, where it had a narrative. It wasn't afraid to, you know, feature dialogue. It tried to paint scenes. I just didn't want to write something flat on the screen, flat on the page, because for the people living the story, it was very 3D.
So you always knew you wanted to go into journalism. So you grew up and went to the Hastings Branch Library a lot, and then you went to Flint Ridge Prep. Was there a teacher there that helped you get interested in English, or were you interested in sciences and math, or your family?
No, I mean, yeah, my father was an engineer with a love for astronomy. I was that creative liberal arts, semi-distracted kid that would be looking out the window when the teacher would go, okay, so what is your algebra answer? And I was just dreaming something else. But I had a teacher at Flint Ridge Prep who inspired a love of writing in me and pulled me aside and said, you should develop your ability. And we'd had very long debates over Hamlet. Was Hamlet insane, or was he sane? And you know, I just knew from that moment on, I wanted to write. I wanted to, you know, explore the world through being a reporter, and later as a book writer. Funny enough, this teacher from prep, I hadn't seen her for years and years. She came to my book signing, or my book event for Arroyo at the Pasadena Central Library. And I was swooning and so grateful, and thought, oh my gosh, you know, the circle is being squared. And then, you know, I'm 5 minutes in and I look down at her to make eye contact, and she's asleep. So, you know, my mom told me it's okay if you fall asleep at events like that, because it's still penetrating your conscience, your consciousness. So I very much got my first love of writing and belief I could do it in high school. And, you know, it was somewhat of a circuitous route to it. But once I got to my first newspaper job, I felt this is what I was supposed to do.
Well, you have won so many awards in your career as well. You've won 7 Los Angeles Press Club Southern California Journalism Awards. Congratulations for that. Your books have been nominated for Independent Publisher Book Awards. You've received wonderful reviews in Kirkus, the Green Prize for Sustainable Literature, the Southern California Book Festival, the Shanghai Book Awards. So that's one that I don't know about. Can you tell us a little bit about the Shanghai Book Awards?
Yeah, you know, talking about patience, in 2008, right as the US economy was going down the drain. I published with another writer a book about the cultural history of the LA smog crisis. Not an engineering technical book, but a people-oriented book. It was the worst time to be writing an environmental story, as people were worried about their life savings, losing their house. Islamic national, terrorism was a very big topic. But 6 years later, China bought the rights. A Chinese publisher bought the rights to the book and became a big success. And all of a sudden, people from China and organizations started saying, your book won this award and that award. And I was just, to be honest with you, bewildered. But the people abroad really were fixated and fascinated by how LA dug its way out of this terrible chemical fog created by cars. And, just when you think nobody cares about a book or you put in all that work for nothing, karma will remember and hopefully reward you if you do it with a good intention. So yes, I did win that award with my co-writer. And when I went to China, they could not have been nicer to me. This is 2015. And, I got a little taste of celebrity.
Well, congratulations for that. Lots of congratulations to you. And your literary subjects have appeared in all these publications. Listen to them: LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Marketplace, C-SPAN, Bluebird, Wired, Slate, PolitiFact, NPR syndicated stations, South China Morning Post, Crime Reads, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. That is quite an accomplishment and absolutely a wonderful, wonderful career. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bit like I have that shark syndrome. If I, if I stop moving, I'm going to drown. And it's not always easy being in the creative field. But there is something that I call the beautiful next. Don't worry about what you've written. Don't be upset about or cocky about a reaction. Just throw yourself into the next idea. Immerse yourself. And it is harder being a writer in these days with social media, with distractions galore. And some writers, honestly, there's software you can get that will not allow you to go on the internet, because writers have such a problem with being distracted, fearing that blank page. And I'm about to start my next novel. And I'm thinking of getting this on my computer, because, you do have to you have to have tunnel vision. And your brain has to be operating on all cylinders. And so I just love my beautiful next. I honestly do. And it's what keeps me moving forward.
Great. So have you thought about doing a story about some well-known local serial killers and their survivors? Or is that what your next story is?
No, frankly, I don't know how true crime writers do it, how they go on to subject to subject to subject. Because for me, when I was interviewing people about a murder, actually a series of murders that happened like 30 years earlier, it was just picking at the wound of people, trying to forget the worst moment of their life. And here comes this dude from Pasadena with his notebook, wide-eyed, hey, tell me everything, asking politely, but it's painful, and I don't want to re-traumatize them. I was trying to be sensitive, like what their kids were thinking. And so I don't think I could be a true crime person again, writing about a serial killer. So my next book is going to be a novel. It's going to be a follow-up to Arroyo. It's not going to be historical fiction, but it's going to be based on a true story about friendship, forgiveness, craziness under the Caltech campus. I saved things from Arroyo that I learned during my research. And, I do think there's an appetite to learn about Pasadena and its history and its schools. And I went to a very tough prep school. And I've been reading like crazy, every book I can about prep schools, including, Catcher in the Rye, A Separate Piece, Skippy Dies, Old School. But the book that most influenced me is Lord of the Flies. I went to Flint Ridge Prep, And it felt like Lord of the Flies there, both chaos and anarchy, and yet humanity. And this next book will be about a character like me, with a friend that really did live. And he came to me near the end of his life as he was dying of terminal cancer. And he wanted me to help compose an apology letter to the victim of an unfortunate accident. I made a promise to him I was going to do it. And I always need to be motivated by a promise, or be angry about something, an injustice. And so that's what I'm doing now. And, it's going to have a lot of heart, and it's going to have a lot of hopefully moments where we understand the power of forgiveness. I have a thesis that if somebody knows they're owed an apology from somebody, they have currency over that person. And in my case, my friend was never able to apologize to the victim of this incident. And, it was a moment when grace could have been shown, and it wasn't. And I find that an interesting element of the human personality. Yeah. So as we wrap up, I do have a question to ask.
Before you finish that,
Yes,
one of the attendees, Cheryl, has raised her hand.
Sure.
So,
Hey, Cheryl.
can you go ahead? Would you like to ask your question?
Well, it's not a question. It's something fun for Chip to know. I was letting other people from Claiborne and Pauley know about this thing today. And so I had emailed Brian Wilson.
Oh my gosh.
Who lived next door to you. And he said, I haven't gotten around to reading Arroyo yet, but he said, my mom and my brothers really loved it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to let you know how much they enjoyed it.
Thank you. And can you tell Brian he owes me $20 still?
He owes you $20. Okay,
Yeah.
I will let him know that.
Yeah. I grew up in a Pasadena where we lived in each other's neighborhoods. All the neighborhood kids went to the same schools. We played on the same block. I miss that today, very much so. So yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well,
does anybody have any other questions, or have I just talked way too much?
no, any other questions?
So,
so go ahead with your trivia contest. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you read the book, it's a pretty fast read. I think you'll understand why I became obsessed with this story. And I wanted to know how it ended, and I wanted to find goodness in a very dark era. So I mentioned my favorite song from the list of songs that I think reflect this era. Does anybody know what song? And if you have the correct answer, the first one, I will send you a signed copy of any of my books.
So ask us the question again.
So I mentioned a list of songs that I really liked, but I thought one song fit Jerry better than the other ones. And does anybody remember what song?
Was it the Wall from Pink Floyd?
No, Cheryl. Sorry, I love that. Yeah, but does anybody know? I can give you a further hint.
Okay, go ahead.
The band is Supertramp.
Okay, what era are these from?
This is from 1979. But you know what? I probably asked it too quickly, so I'll do this. If anybody wants to email me at chip@chipjacobs.com, I will send them a signed copy of any of my books. Just check out my website. I've written on a variety of subjects. And if you just email me, give me your address, I will send you a signed copy.
That's very extremely generous of you. Thank you very much, Chip.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's time and interest.
Thank you very, very much. So how do you write? Do you get up in the morning and sit down and write right away? Or are you just doing research? You do your research first of all, and then you sit down and write?
No, I'm a very much of a morning person. And when I'm hopped up on caffeine, I'm at my best. So it's a good question. I usually write from about 9 to 3. And then after 3, the half-life of my attention span begins to show. And I'm starting to get interested in other things. other projects. And basically I use that for research or going back over what I write. But most writers do have a pattern. I often will, before I hit the keyboard, I'll read a few pages of some other writer just to get the juices flowing. And, you know, set a limit of writing, say 1,500 words a day. Because you know what, if you produce 1,500 words a day, even when you're in a bad mood, you're sick, whatever, at the end of a month, you're going to have a head of steam. So that's my general routine.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Chip, so much for your wonderful presentation to us today. Your video, your PowerPoint, you've given us a wonderful portrayal of your book and your dedication to research and writing and reading the book for us. So we've had a wonderful afternoon. We feel like if we didn't know you well before, we now know you really well. And we're already looking forward to your next book. So when is it going to come out? When's your next book out?
I don't know, but probably in about a year. Probably about a year. But again, if people want to contact me and let me know any book, I will send them a copy. I mean, you know, all us writers, the goal is to get you to read. You know, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, authors want 9 hours of your time. That's about how long it takes to read the average book. You know, and that's the most precious thing to give somebody is your time. So, you know, hopefully I'll get you reading to the last page.
So are you going to end with telling us the name of the song?
Yeah, it was called The Logical Song. And actually somebody did get it right, but I want to give, you know, I'm happy to send it to anybody. But yeah, Michael actually got
The
it.
Logical Song. Okay, well, we'll all go to our phones and get that playing on our music so we can
It's a
hear
fantastic song, and it's about a very smart guy that just doesn't understand a very bizarre world. So yeah, I love Supertramp. So.
Well, thank you so much, Chip. And thank you all for attending. I hope you join our other authors and their series programs. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Great job, everybody. You guys ran that show perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you.